Hello guys. Welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see. What if Ash won the Sinnoh League and his reward was a harem led by Dawn and Cynthia? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Crown of Victory, the Weight of Destiny. The world was a symphony of sound, and Ash Ketchum was its conductor. It was a roar that had a physical weight to it, 100,000 voices crashing down from the stands of Lily of the Valley Island Stadium, shaking the very foundations of the battlefield. Dust and ozone hung in the air, a gritty perfume of absolute exertion. Opposite him, across the scarred and cratered expanse of rock and dirt, stood Tobias. The man's expression, usually a mask of unreadable calm, was cracked. A fissure of disbelief ran through his composure. His Latios, the indomitable dragon of Eon, was down. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Pikachu stood over the fallen legendary, his small body a silhouette against the harsh stadium lights. He was breathing in ragged, desperate gasps. Electricity sparking weakly from cheeks stained with grime. One ear drooped, and his tail was caked in mud, but he was standing. That, in itself, was a miracle. Latios is unable to battle. The referee's voice boomed, a crack of thunder that finally broke the spell of stunned silence. The winner, and therefore the new champion of the Sinnoh League Conference, is Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town. The wave of sound that followed was immense, a tsunami of pure, unrestrained joy that washed over Ash, threatening to pull him under. He felt his knees weaken, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer, overwhelming reality of it. He'd done it. After so many years, so many leagues, so many heartbreakingly close calls, he had finally won. His eyes found Pikachu, his partner, his friend, his brother. Pikachu's gaze met his, and a silent conversation passed between them in an instant. A decade of shared dreams, of defeats that forged them and victories that thrilled them, all culminating in this one, perfect moment. A grin split Ash's face, wide and uncontrolled, and he sprinted across the ruined field. Pikachu. You were amazing, he yelled, scooping the electric mouse into a desperate, laughing hug. Pikachu. Pikachu chirped, a weak but triumphant cry, nuzzling into Ash's shoulder. Brock and Dawn were already at the edge of the field, their faces a brilliant painting of shock and elation. Dawn's Piplup was jumping up and down on her head, squawking with excitement. He did it! He actually did it! Dawn shrieked, her voice lost in the cacophony. Brock was just shaking his head, a slow, proud smile on his face. All that training, all that stubbornness, it paid off. Tobias recalled his Latios with a quiet click of a premier ball, his shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second before he straightened them. He walked forward, his hand extended. Ash, still holding Pikachu, met him in the center of the field. That was an unconventional strategy, Tobias said, his voice low but clear over the din. There was no malice in it, only a profound, analytical respect. To have Pikachu ride Latios, disrupting its psychic field with close-range electricity while using its own giga-impact momentum to drive it into the ground, no one could have predicted that. Ash shook his hand, his grip firm. It's how we do things, he replied, and it was the truest statement he'd ever made. It wasn't about type matchups or by-the-book strategies. It was about trust. He'd seen the opening, the split-second chance when Latios had roared past, and he had trusted Pikachu to understand the impossible command. Pikachu, in turn, had trusted Ash's instinct completely. As they separated, Ash's gaze drifted up to the champion's platform. Mr. Goodshow was beaming, applauding enthusiastically. But it was the woman beside him that caught Ash's attention. Cynthia, the champion of Sinnoh. Her long blonde hair was a calm sea in the storm of the stadium, her expression uncharacteristically stark. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't applauding. Her gray eyes were fixed on him, and they held an intensity that had nothing to do with congratulations. It was a look of profound, terrifying gravity, as if she wasn't watching the end of a battle, but the beginning of something far more significant. The look sent an involuntary shiver down his spine, a flicker of unease in the furnace of his victory. The ceremony was a blur. The flash of cameras, the weight of the trophy in his hands, the roar of the crowd that never seemed to fade. He waved, he smiled, he held the trophy aloft with Pikachu on his shoulder, but a part of his mind kept returning to Cynthia's expression. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, celebrating the view, while someone behind him was watching the storm roll in from the horizon. Reporters swarmed him the moment he stepped off the dais. "Ash, what's the first thing you're going to do as champion? How did you come up with the strategy to beat not one, but two legendary Pokémon? Is it true you're challenging the Elite Four next week?" He was drowning in a sea of microphones and questions when a calm, authoritative voice cut through the noise like a well-honed blade. "That's enough." The reporters turned. Cynthia stood there, flanked by two league officials in sharp suits. Her presence commanded an immediate, almost fearful, silence. Her Garchomp was not visible, but you could feel the shadow of its power behind her. She moved with a fluid grace that was both elegant and predatory. "The new champion needs a moment to recover," she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. She gestured to Ash, Brock, and Dawn. "You three, with me, now." It wasn't a request. Before Ash could even process what was happening, the officials had formed a barrier against the press, and Cynthia was herding them through a private exit, away from the cheering crowds and into the sterile, quiet corridors beneath the stadium. "Cynthia, what's going on?" Dawn asked, her earlier excitement replaced by a nervous energy. "Is Ash in some kind of trouble?" "No," Cynthia said, her pace never slowing. She led them to a sleek, black helicopter waiting on a private helipad, its rotors already beginning to spin. "He's in something far more important." Ash exchanged a confused look with Brock. He was still clutching the trophy, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of Pikachu on his shoulder. "Where are we going?" Cynthia finally stopped at the open door of the helicopter and turned to face him fully. The setting sun cast long shadows, catching the gold beads in her hair. "To the place where Sinnoh began and where your new journey must start. We're going to the Spear Pillar." The flight was a study in rising tension. Below them, the vibrant green of Sinnoh's forests and the sapphire blue of its lakes sprawled out, a beautiful, peaceful tapestry. But inside the cabin, the mood was anything but. Ash sat by the window, watching the landscape blur by, the weight of Cynthia's words settling in his gut. The Spear Pillar. The place where Dialga and Palkia were summoned. He'd been there once before, in the midst of a crisis that had nearly torn the world apart. People didn't just go there. Brock, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the silence. "Cynthia, with all due respect, what does the Spear Pillar have to do with Ash winning the league? The champion's duties are public knowledge. They don't involve secret trips to the top of Mount Coronet." Cynthia's gaze was fixed on the snow-capped peak of the mountain looming larger on the horizon. "The public knowledge is a story, Brock. A necessary one. It speaks of defending the region, of being a symbol of strength. The true duty is a secret held only by the champion and a select few. It is a burden, not a title." Dawn shivered, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "A burden? What are you talking about?" Cynthia's eyes met Ash's in the reflective glass of the window. "Ash, your victory today was more than just impressive. It was significant. To defeat a trainer wielding a Darkrai and a Latios, it requires more than skill. It requires an extraordinary connection, an empathy with your Pokémon that resonates on a level most can't comprehend." "It's just how I've always been," Ash said, shrugging, feeling a little embarrassed. "My Pokémon are my friends. We win together, we lose together." "Precisely," Cynthia said, a hint of something like relief in her voice. "That connection, that innate harmony, it's a form of aura. A very pure, very powerful form. And it's what we've been waiting for." The helicopter landed on a rocky plateau a short distance from the Pilar's entrance, the wind whipping at them with freezing intensity the moment they stepped out. The air here was thin and sharp, tasting of ice and ozone and something else, something ancient and electric. The ruins of the Spear Pillar stood before them, a collection of broken columns and weathered stone arches pointing toward the heavens like the skeletal fingers of a forgotten god. The place felt alive, humming with a latent energy that made the hairs on Ash's arms stand up. Cynthia led them into the heart of the ruins, to the circular platform where Cyrus had once stood. The patterns carved into the floor were faint, but Ash recognized them, the symbols for time, space, and the mysterious third power that bound them. "For thousands of years," Cynthia began, her voice echoing in the vast, empty space, "the champion of Sinnoh has been more than a trainer. They're the guardian of this place. A sentinel. We watch for signs of instability, for tremors in the fabric of reality. She walked to the edge of the platform and pointed down the sheer face of the mountain. Lately, the signs have become more frequent. Small spatial warps in the valleys. Temporal loops near Celestic Town that last for only a few seconds. The wild Pokémon are agitated, their territories shifting without reason. The Lake Trio, Mesprit, Uxie, and Azulf, have grown quiet. They're bracing for something. Ash felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. This sounded all too familiar. You think Dialga and Palkia are going to fight again? No, this is different, Cynthia said, turning back to them. What Cyrus did here weakened the veil between our world and others. Think of it like a piece of fabric stretched too thin. It's beginning to tear. The legends speak of this time. They call it the unraveling. And they speak of the only thing that can mend the fabric. She knelt, brushing snow and debris from a section of the floor Ash had never noticed before. It was a different set of carvings, older and deeper than the others. They depicted a human figure, surrounded by Pokémon, glowing with a brilliant light. This figure stood between the clashing forms of Dialga and Palkia, holding them apart not with physical strength, but with a palpable aura of command. The prophecy of the Arbiter, Cynthia breathed, her voice filled with awe. A mortal chosen by fate, with an aura so resonant that it can harmonize the discordant notes of creation itself. A soul pure enough to wield a sliver of the origin power without being consumed by it. Dawn's eyes were wide. The origin power? You mean, Arceus? Cynthia nodded grimly. The Arbiter is meant to be a living anchor. A safeguard. A champion for the world, not just a region. The prophecy states that the Arbiter would reveal himself through a feat of impossible harmony, a victory of bond over raw power, at a time of great need. Today, Ash, you did just that. The wind howled, and for a moment, Ash's mind went blank. Him? The kid from Pallet Town who once electrocuted a flock of Spearow because he didn't know how to be a good partner to Pikachu. It was insane. Me? But, I'm just a trainer, he stammered, the trophy in his hands suddenly feeling ridiculously trivial. You are, Cynthia agreed, rising to her feet. And that is why it has to be you. A politician would seek to control the power. A scientist would seek to dissect it. A conqueror would seek to weaponize it. You would seek to understand it. To befriend it. That is the nature of the Arbiter. She looked him directly in the eye, her expression stripped of all pretense. It was the look of a leader passing on a terrible, necessary weight. But it is a choice. This is not a crown I can place on your head. It is a burden you must choose to lift. You can walk away from this right now. Take your trophy, go home, and be the celebrated champion of the Sinnoh League. Brock and Dawn and I will never speak of it again. We will do what we can to brace for the coming storm, but the prophecy is clear. Without the Arbiter, we will eventually fail. The world will unravel. Silence descended, broken only by the mournful cry of the wind. Ash looked at his friends. Brock's face was grim, but his eyes held a steady, unwavering belief. Dawn looked terrified, but also fiercely protective, her hand hovering near her Pokeballs as if ready to defend him from the very concept of this destiny. He looked down at Pikachu, who met his gaze with that same look of absolute trust he'd had in the arena. The choice wasn't a choice at all. How could he walk away, knowing what was at stake? How could he go home and celebrate, knowing that people, Pokémon, the entire world, might be in danger? He thought of all the times he'd run headfirst into trouble to save a single Pokémon or a single person. This was just bigger. He took a deep breath, the frigid air clearing his head. He placed the trophy carefully on a flat, broken pillar. It was just an object. This was real. I'll do it, he said. The words were quiet, but they resonated in the thin air with the force of an oath. If I can help, I will. A slow, genuine smile finally bloomed on Cynthia's face. It was a smile of profound relief, of a burden shared. I knew you would say that. She gestured to the center of the platform. Then the ritual must be completed. It will awaken the dormant power within you, connecting your aura to the ley lines of the world itself. It will not be pleasant. Ash nodded, his jaw set. He walked to the center circle and stood tall. Pikachu leapt from his shoulder, taking up a position a few feet away, a tiny, loyal sentinel. Cynthia began to chant in an ancient dialect, her voice weaving a complex, melodic pattern that seemed to pull at the energy humming in the stone. The carvings on the floor began to glow, first a faint white, then a brilliant gold. The light crawled up from the floor, swirling around Ash's legs, his torso, his arms. It wasn't hot or cold, it was everything. He could feel the pulse of the mountain beneath his feet, the rush of the wind as a living entity, the distant, dreaming thoughts of the Pokémon hibernating deep within the rock. Then, the power hit him. It was like a dam breaking inside his soul. A torrent of raw, untamed energy surged through him, a billion volts of pure life force. His own aura, the quiet warmth he'd always felt, erupted into a supernova. He cried out, his back arching as the golden light exploded from him, a beacon on the mountaintop. It was agony and ecstasy entwined. He felt every living thing in Sinnoh as a distinct point of light. The fish in Lake Verity, the Ponyta on the plains, the people in Jubilife City. He felt the planet's immense, slow heartbeat. He felt the cold, silent void of space beyond the sky. And through it all, he felt a singular, divine presence, a consciousness vast as a galaxy, observing him, acknowledging him, approving. He was going to be torn apart, atomized by the sheer scale of it. It was too much, too vast for one person to contain. But he wasn't one person. As the golden light pulsed outward, a wave of raw, unfiltered power, it washed over the others. Brock stumbled back, shielding his eyes, the force too alien for him to comprehend. But Dawn cried out, clutching her chest. Through her deep, spiritual connection to Mesprit, the being of emotion, she was uniquely attuned to this kind of energy. She didn't just see the light, she felt the staggering weight of Ash's will, his fear, his determination, his boundless compassion. It was a torrent of emotion that should have overwhelmed her, but instead, her own spirit reached out instinctively, not to take the power, but to ground it. To offer an anchor in the storm. Ash! She yelled, taking a step forward, her hand outstretched. At the same time, Cynthia gasped. She, as the guardian, had a latent connection to the spear pillar itself. The ritual was using her as a conduit, and now, with the Arbiter's power fully unleashed, the ancient pact of her station was activated. She felt the history of 100 generations of champions, their quiet vigils, their silent oaths, all flowing towards Ash. She was the vessel of knowledge, the keeper of the lore that gave his power context and purpose. A strand of golden light shot from Ash's chest and wrapped around Dawn's outstretched hand. Another strand found Cynthia, connecting to the center of her being. The overwhelming torrent of power within Ash suddenly found two channels, two release valves. The crushing pressure lessened, becoming manageable, focused. He could feel them. It wasn't telepathy, it was deeper. He felt Dawn's unwavering belief in him, a warmth that soothed the ragged edges of his fear. He felt Cynthia's formidable strength, her vast knowledge, a steadying presence that gave structure to the chaos. He wasn't just Ash anymore. He was the center of a trinity, a covenant of will, emotion, and knowledge. On the back of his right hand, a golden emblem began to burn itself into his skin, 3 interlocking triangles, reminiscent of the Triforce from old legends, but with a unique, flowing design. At the same instant, smaller, identical marks appeared on Dawn's hand and on Cynthia's. They were bound. The light subsided, leaving the three of them standing in the twilight, breathing heavily. Ash looked at his hand, then at Dawn and Cynthia, who were staring at their own marks with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. What was that? Dawn whispered, her voice trembling. The covenant, Cynthia said, her gaze distant, as if she were reading from a scroll only she could see. The prophecy said the Arbiter could not stand alone. His power requires anchors. An anchor of emotion, to keep his heart true. An anchor of knowledge, to guide his path. She looked from Dawn to herself, and then to Ash. It would seem our roles have been chosen. Ash looked at them, at the two most important women in his Sinnoh journey, now inexplicably and irrevocably tied to his destiny. He felt their presence in the back of his mind, a quiet hum of connection that was both strange and deeply comforting. He wasn't alone in this. The thought gave him a strength the power itself could not. He was about to speak, to try and make sense of this impossible new reality, when the ground beneath them lurched with sickening violence. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a nauseating, twisting motion, as if the very geometry of the mountain was being warped. A low, guttural roar echoed from the sky above, a sound that didn't travel through the air but seemed to drill directly into their minds. It was a sound of pure, nihilistic rage. Brock, who had regained his footing, pointed a trembling finger toward the heavens. What in the world is that? The sky above the spear pillar was tearing open. It wasn't a cloud, but a jagged, black wound in reality, bleeding shadows and distorted colors. From within the rift, something vast and terrible stirred. They couldn't see its shape clearly, just a writhing mass of black and red, a serpentine form wreathed in a miasma of anti-energy. Cynthia's face had gone pale, her composure finally breaking into naked alarm. Giratina. The name hung in the frozen air. It sensed the power surge, Cynthia said, her voice tight with urgency. The awakening of the Arbiter's power was like a dinner bell ringing across dimensions. It's drawn to the energy. The distorted shadow in the sky writhed again, and another wave of fury washed over them, a promise of utter destruction. The celebration, the trophy, the cheering crowds, they felt like a memory from another lifetime. Ash Ketchum, the newly crowned champion, stood on the roof of the world, his victory prize not a plaque or a check, but a divine power, a sacred duty, and a covenant with the two women beside him. And his first act as the arbiter of balance would be to face the god of the distortion world, who was currently ripping a hole in the sky to come and kill him. He looked at Dawn, then at Cynthia. He saw his own shock and fear mirrored in their eyes, but beneath it, he saw a flicker of something else. Resolve. They were in this together. Ash's hand clenched into a fist, the new mark on his skin feeling warm. Pikachu, get ready, he yelled, his voice not shaking, but ringing with a command he didn't know he possessed. The real battle had just begun. Chapter 2. The Unseen Authority and the Psychic's Gaze. The rage that poured from the tear in the sky was a physical force. It wasn't a sound that traveled to the ears, but a vibration that resonated deep in the bone, a psychic scream of territorial violation. The world's color palette seemed to desaturate, the vibrant sunset hues over Mount Coronet turning a sickly, bruised purple under the oppressive shadow of the distortion world's monarch. Giratina was not just present, it was imposing its very nature onto their reality. Ash's first instinct, honed over a decade of crises, was to fight. His hand was already moving towards his belt, his mind racing through his team. Infernape's raw power. Sceptile's speed. But a sharp, warning pressure bloomed in his mind, a feeling of cool, analytical caution. It was Cynthia's presence in their newfound covenant, a silent but potent veto. Don't. Her thoughts seemed to echo in the space between them. Attacking it is what it expects. You'll be playing by its rules. This isn't a battle for dominance. Simultaneously, a wave of empathy, warm and insistent, washed over him from Dawn's side of the bond. It wasn't just rage she felt from Giratina. It was a deep, guttural confusion. A sense of pain. Like an animal whose territory had been invaded by a blinding, inexplicable light. It's scared, Dawn's feeling conveyed, a realization that stunned Ash. It's lashing out because it doesn't understand what you are. Fight. Analyze. Empathize. 3 separate instincts, now his own. He was the confluence, the point where they met. The arbiter. He took a breath, letting the urge to battle recede, and embraced the other two. Cynthia was right. A fight would only escalate this. Dawn was right. This was a creature in pain, not a monster bent on destruction. So he would do something new, something he'd never done before. Pikachu, stay with me, he said, his voice quiet but firm. He took a step forward, away from the protection of his friends, into the open. The pressure from Giratina's presence intensified, trying to force him to his knees. It felt like standing at the bottom of the deepest ocean. He ignored it. He closed his eyes and focused inward, not on his Pokémon, but on the golden light that now lived within him. He remembered the feeling of connection to every living thing in Sinnoh. He remembered the quiet, approving presence of the origin power. He was not a threat. He was a part of the world, just as Giratina was. A guardian, not a conqueror. He let that feeling, that absolute, unwavering certainty of his purpose, flow out of him. He didn't project it as an attack, but as a broadcast. A signal. I am here. I am a part of this world's balance. I mean you no harm. The raging psychic scream faltered for a heartbeat. The immense, shadowy form in the sky stilled, its countless legs ceasing their chaotic churning. Red eyes, burning like dying stars, focused on the small, glowing figure on the pillar. It could sense the power, the echo of its own creator, but it was filtered through a mortal will that was not aggressive, it was peaceful. Ash felt Dawn's emotional energy pour into his broadcast, amplifying the feeling of peace, smoothing over the edges of his own fear and uncertainty. He felt Cynthia's knowledge give it form, shaping it into a message of respect for Giratina's domain, an acknowledgement of its role as a force of nature. Their covenant acted as one, a trinity of intent. The golden light emanating from Ash softened, losing its sharp, explosive quality and becoming a warm, steady glow. It was the light of a hearth, not a lightning strike. Giratina's roar softened to a low, questioning rumble. It tilted its massive, crested head, an ancient and terrible being utterly perplexed by the mortal who stood before it, not with weapons raised, but with an open hand and a quiet soul. It saw the power that had drawn it here, but it was held in a vessel that refused to yield to its primal instincts. For a long, breathless moment, God and boy observed one another across the dimensional divide. Then, with a final, echoing growl that sounded less like a threat and more like a reluctant acknowledgement, Giratina receded. The terror in the sky did not vanish, but rather sealed itself shut, the edges of reality knitting back together with a faint, sizzling sound. The oppressive pressure vanished. The colors of the world snapped back into vibrancy. The only sounds were the whistling of the wind and the ragged gasps of Ash, who fell to one knee, sweat beading on his forehead. The sheer concentration had taken a massive toll. Pikachu was instantly at his side, nudging his hand. "Pikapi." "I'm okay, buddy," Ash breathed, managing a weak smile. He looked up at Dawn and Cynthia, who were rushing toward him. It worked. Cynthia knelt beside him, her usual composure replaced with sheer, undisguised awe. "You didn't fight it. You reasoned with it." "I just showed it we weren't a threat," Ash said, pushing himself to his feet with Brock's help. The bond in his mind felt quiet, but still present, a warm and steady hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. He looked at his hand, at the glowing golden mark that was now fading to a faint, tattoo-like etching on his skin. "We showed it." The helicopter ride back down the mountain was thick with the unsaid. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a chilling sobriety. Ash had stared down a literal god and made it back away. The victory felt hollow, heavy with the weight of what it implied. He was no longer just Ash Ketchum. That boy had been left behind on the winner's podium. The energy signature from that event will have been picked up by every major research station from here to Hoenn, Cynthia said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, her gaze distant as she watched the lights of the League complex grow closer. "The awakening, Giratina, we can't keep this quiet." "What are we going to tell people?" Dawn asked, her voice small. She sat close to Ash, a comforting presence. He could feel her anxiety through the bond, a sharp counterpoint to her outward bravery. "We won't have to tell them anything," Cynthia replied grimly. "They will come to us, and they will demand answers." "Ash," she turned to him, her expression serious. "The world is not ready for this. Powerful people fear what they cannot control. You are now the single most powerful, uncontrolled variable on the planet. Be ready." Her words were prophetic. As their helicopter landed, they weren't greeted by cheering fans or inquisitive reporters. They were met by a stark, unnerving silence. The helipad, usually bustling with League staff, was empty save for a line of figures standing under the harsh floodlights. They were tall, dressed in immaculate, charcoal-gray uniforms that seemed to absorb the light. Sleek, angular body armor covered their chests and shoulders, and their faces were obscured by reflective black visors. They stood with military precision, hands clasped behind their backs. Flanking them, floating silently a foot off the ground, were two Metagross, their metallic bodies gleaming, their multiple eyes glowing with a cold, red intelligence. These weren't League security. This was something else entirely. A man stepped forward from between the two psychic behemoths. He was older, with sharp, patrician features and a mane of perfectly coiffed silver hair. He wore a tailored suit of impossible quality, the kind that cost more than a house. But it was his eyes that held Ash's attention. They were a piercing, intelligent blue, and they radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. He smiled, a warm, disarming expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Ash Ketchum," the man said, his voice a smooth, charismatic baritone. "A historic victory. On behalf of the International Pokemon League Association, I offer my sincerest congratulations." He extended a hand. Ash, stepping out of the helicopter, shook it. The man's grip was like steel. "Thank you, sir." "I am Chairman Volos," he said, his smile unwavering as his eyes swept over Dawn, Brock, and finally, settled on Cynthia. "Champion. I trust your excursion to the mountain was fruitful." The way he said it made it clear he knew exactly where they had been and what had happened. Cynthia's posture stiffened. "Chairman, your presence here is unexpected. The Aegis Division is a long way from home." "Extraordinary circumstances," Volos replied smoothly, gesturing to his silent guards. "A power surge of unprecedented scale, followed by a confirmed Class 5-dimensional rift. Naturally, the IPLA is here to ensure the stability of the region and the safety of its citizens." His gaze returned to Ash, and the thin veneer of warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a chillingly pragmatic intensity. "We believe you are the source of that power surge, Mr. Ketchum. A private conversation is in order." The conversation took place in the League's command center, a room that had been subtly but completely taken over. Volos's Aegis guards stood at every exit. Technicians in matching gray uniforms worked silently at consoles, their screens displaying complex energy readings and topographical maps of Mount Coronet. Volos sat at the head of the large conference table, steepling his fingers. Ash sat opposite him, with Cynthia to his right and Dawn to his left. Brock stood watchfully near the door. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Volos began, his voice losing its public charm and taking on a sharp, corporate edge. "Our orbital sensors detected an energy event at the spear pillar that defies all known physics. An output comparable to the detonation of a small nuclear weapon, yet it was creative, not destructive. Then, a distortion world event. We know you were at the epicenter, Ash. We want to know what happened. And we want to know the nature of the power you now possess." Ash glanced at Cynthia. Her jaw was tight. This was the political battleground she had warned him about. "What happened at the spear pillar is a matter of Sinnoh tradition, Chairman," Cynthia interjected, her voice like ice. "It is not subject to IPLA oversight." Volos chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Sinnoh tradition doesn't tear a hole in reality. This is now a matter of global security. Legendary Pokémon, dimensional rifts, anomalous human abilities, these are not toys. They're existential threats. History has proven that time and time again. They must be controlled, studied, contained for the good of all." "He's not a threat," Dawn burst out, unable to stay silent. "He saved the mountain, he calmed Giratina down." Volos's gaze shifted to her, dismissive and patronizing. "A commendable sentiment from a young heart, my dear. But control is an illusion. What he calmed today could be enraged tomorrow. What happens when he loses his temper? When this power lashes out? A city block leveled? A region plunged into chaos? The IPLA exists to prevent such catastrophes?" He turned his full attention back to Ash, his expression becoming serious, almost fatherly. "Son, I understand. This must be frightening, exhilarating. But you cannot possibly comprehend the forces you are dealing with. I am offering you a chance to do the right thing. Come with me. The IPLA has the most advanced facilities in the world. We can help you understand this power, control it. We will keep you, and the world, safe. Think of it as protective custody." The words hung in the air, a gilded cage presented as a sanctuary. Ash felt a surge of indignation. This man spoke of his bond with his Pokémon, his very soul, as if it were a disease to be cured. He felt the cold anger from Cynthia, the fierce, protective loyalty from Dawn. They were with him. He wasn't alone. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting Volos's without flinching. "My power isn't a weapon. It isn't something to be locked in a box. And it's not yours." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the Arbiter's authority. "I won't go with you." Volos's mask of civility finally dropped. A flicker of cold fury crossed his face before he smoothed it over once more. He sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. "I had hoped you would be reasonable," he said, tapping a command into a tablet on the table. "But your idealism, while charming, is a liability." Ash's Pokésh, sitting on his wrist, suddenly went dead. A red light flashed on the screen before it powered down completely. "What did you do?" Ash demanded, looking at the dead device. "As of this moment," Volos announced, rising from his chair, "your trainer identification code has been indefinitely suspended, pending a full security review by the International Pokémon League Association. Your access to all official Pokémon centers, PC storage systems, and League facilities is revoked. You are, for all intents and purposes, no longer a recognized Pokémon trainer." Brock gasped. "You can't do that. It's a violation of League Charter. I am the chairman of the board that writes the charter, young man, Volos retorted coolly. I can do whatever I deem necessary for global security. You and your friends are to be confined to your lodgings at the athletes' village under supervised quarantine until you reconsider my generous offer. Do not attempt to leave. For your own safety, of course. He turned and strode out of the room, his Aegis guards falling into formation behind him. They were prisoners. Stripped of his title and his rights, Ash was trapped, his grand victory having turned to ash in his mouth. Their lodgings were the luxurious suite they had been given as finalists, but it now felt like a cage. 2 Aegis guards were posted outside their door, their impassive visors a constant reminder of their situation. The windows were sealed. Their communications were cut. This is insane. Dawn paced the length of the living room, her fists clenched. He can't just declare Ash a non-person. He can, and he did, Cynthia said, her mind clearly racing, analyzing every angle. She stood by the sealed window, looking out at the sprawling complex. Volos is a master of control. He doesn't use brute force when bureaucracy and public opinion are so much more effective. Right now, his media machine is spinning a story. Champion Ash Ketchum, suffering from battle exhaustion, under observation. He's isolating us, cutting us off from any potential allies. Ash was sitting on the couch, staring at his useless Pokésh. He felt neutered. For his entire life, being a Pokemon trainer was his identity. Volos had taken that away with a single command. Pikachu was on his lap, trying to cheer him up, but the familiar weight of his partner only reminded him of what was at stake. It was Brock who brought them back to the immediate problem. He had been quietly examining the room's vents, the service panels, the structural blueprints he'd managed to pull up on his own personal datapad before the network was cut. He's thorough, but he's arrogant, Brock said, tapping a schematic of the hotel. He thinks we're just kids. He's secured the main corridors and the public exits. But this is a luxury suite. It has a private service causeway for catering and maintenance. They'll have it watched, but it won't be as heavily guarded. Just then, the television, which had been playing a loop of IPLA public service announcements, flickered to a live news broadcast. A frantic reporter stood in a town square Ash recognized instantly. Celestic Town. Repeating, a major anomalous event is unfolding in Celestic Town, the reporter said, her voice strained. Witnesses describe it as time itself breaking. Objects are freezing in midair, people are caught in short, repeating loops of time. The IPLA has dispatched its elite Aegis division to contain the situation, but the phenomenon appears to be spreading. The camera panned, showing exactly what she described. A flock of starly was frozen in the sky like a child's mobile. A man walking out of a shop was stuck, taking the same step forward and backward again and again. The air itself seemed to shimmer, distorted like heat haze. Cynthia looked at Ash. This is it. The instability I warned you about. Your awakening was the epicenter, and this is the first major aftershock. Ash shot to his feet, his lethargy burned away by a surge of purpose. There are people there. Pokemon. They're in trouble. But we're trapped, Ash, Dawn said, gesturing to the door. And Volos's men are there, too. They'll grab you the second they see you. I don't care, Ash said, his eyes blazing with a familiar fire. We can't just sit here and do nothing. He felt the Covenant stir. He felt Dawn's fear being overridden by her fierce agreement. He felt Cynthia's mind shift from analysis to action, a plan already forming. They were of one mind. The escape was a blur of calculated risks. Brock popped a service panel in the pantry, revealing the dark, narrow causeway. As they slipped inside, Ash sent his Staraptor out. Create a diversion on the roof. Loud as you can. The bird screeched and shot up the service shaft, bursting out onto the rooftop and letting out a series of booming cries that sent the guards scrambling. Under the cover of the noise, they navigated the labyrinthine corridors behind the walls, Brock guiding them with an unerring sense of direction. They emerged in a laundry facility, stole some staff uniforms as disguises, and blended in with the evening shift change, walking right out the service entrance. They commandeered a League-issue jeep and sped away from the complex, the lights of Lily of the Valley Island shrinking behind them. They were fugitives. Celestic Town was worse than the broadcast had shown. The Aegis division had set up a perimeter, their cold efficiency on full display as they herded panicked civilians away. But inside the perimeter, the temporal distortion was a nightmare. The air was thick with the silent screams of moments torn from their proper place in time. As they crept past the cordon, a lone figure observing the chaos caught Cynthia's eye. The woman was dressed in a practical traveler's coat, her lavender hair a stark splash of color in the grim scene. She moved with an unnatural grace, stepping through the shimmer of a localized time loop as if it were a mere puddle. An espion, its twin tails twitching, walked calmly at her side. Annabelle, Cynthia breathed, recognizing the salon maiden of the Kanto battle frontier. What is she doing here? Before they could ponder it, a cry of terror cut through the air. A small family, a mother, father, and a little girl clutching a Teddyersa doll, were trapped on the second-floor balcony of a small apartment building. The building was groaning, caught in a temporal stress fracture. It was collapsing in excruciatingly slow motion, bricks and mortar peeling away from the frame like fruit from a rind. The Aegis agents below were shouting into their comms, but making no move to help. Civilian assets are unrecoverable, one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. Maintain the quarantine zone. The subjects are an acceptable loss. Acceptable loss? Dawn whispered in horror. That was it. Ash wasn't thinking anymore. He was moving. He vaulted over a decorative fence, ignoring Cynthia's warning cry. Ash, no. Your power. They'll see you. He didn't care. He ran towards the building, his focus entirely on the terrified family. He could feel their panic, a sharp, stabbing pain in his own chest. He stopped beneath the balcony, planting his feet. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his aura. He focused on the space around the family, the roiling, chaotic energy of the distortion. He didn't try to fight it. He remembered what he did with Giratina. He felt for the rhythm of the world, the steady, constant beat of time that was being drowned out by the noise. He found it, and he pushed back. A soft, golden light enveloped him, pouring from his hands and his eyes. It wasn't a blast, but a field, a bubble of stability that he projected upwards. The air around the balcony shimmered, and for a few precious seconds, the horrifying slow-motion collapse froze. The temporal distortion around them was normalized. Jump! He yelled, his voice straining. Now, the father didn't hesitate. He grabbed his daughter, and he and his wife leapt from the balcony, landing hard but safe on the grass below. The moment they were clear, the golden light from Ash flickered and died. He staggered, the backlash hitting him like a physical blow. The world swam in his vision. The effort had drained him almost completely. The Aegis agents, having witnessed the whole thing, were now running towards him, their weapons raised. Subject as hostile, deploying capture units. This was it. He was spent. He had nowhere to run. Suddenly, a wave of shimmering purple energy washed over the advancing agents. Their high-tech visors sparked and went dark. Their stun rifles powered down. They stumbled, disoriented, clutching their heads. That's enough of that, a calm, female voice said. Ash looked up. Annabelle and her espion now stood between him and the Aegis squad. The Frontier Brain's eyes glowed with a faint psychic power. I was sent by Scott to observe the source of the energy readings, she said, her voice cool and measured, though she didn't look at Ash. Her attention was on the enemy. My orders were not to interfere. But the IPLA classifying civilians as acceptable losses, and hunting a boy who just saved them, that changes the terms of my observation. She flicked her wrist, and a nearby stack of empty crates flew through the air, crashing down and blocking the street, creating a barrier between them and the disoriented guards. Scott suspected Chairman Volos was overstepping his authority, Annabelle said, finally turning to look at Ash, her analytical gaze taking in his exhausted state, the fading mark on his hand. He said if I found you, and you were who he thought you were, I should offer my assistance. She gave a small, wry smile. It seems he was right. My name is Annabelle. You look like you could use a hand. Before Ash could reply, she gestured down a narrow alleyway. This way. I can create a psychic illusion to cover our escape. We need to move. Now. Cynthia, Dawn, and Brock rushed to Ash's side, helping him up. As they plunged into the shadows of the alley, leaving Volos's blinded agents behind, Ash looked at the newcomer. Annabelle, the powerful psychic, had just defied the most powerful organization in the world for him. He was a fugitive. He was a target. But his covenant, the circle of those who stood with him, had just grown. And as they disappeared into the night, the weight of his destiny felt, for the first time, a little less lonely. Chapter 3. fugitives of the distortion and the devil's bargain. The world had shrunk. It was now a series of back-alley deals for stale bread and water, clandestine meetings in the basements of sympathetic Pokemon centers, and long, cold nights spent in the rustling quiet of Sinnoh's deep forests. They were ghosts, erased from the digital world by Chairman Volos's decree and hunted in the physical one by his Aegis division. The grand, cheering stadiums felt like a fever dream from a different life. Annabelle's presence had been a godsend. Her psychic abilities were a shield they desperately needed. More than once, an Aegis patrol had walked right past their hiding spot, their eyes glazing over, perceiving nothing more than a dense thicket of bushes or a shadowy alcove, courtesy of a precisely crafted illusion from Annabelle and her espion. She was a quiet, intense woman, her words few but her actions decisive. She observed Ash with a disconcerting focus, as if he were a complex equation she was determined to solve. "Your control is rudimentary," she stated one evening, as they huddled around a small, smokeless fire Brock had managed to coax from damp wood. Ash had been trying to consciously access his aura, to feel the connection to his new allies without the trigger of a life or death crisis. The golden light flickered weakly around his hand before sputtering out. "You have immense power, but it's a floodlight. You need to learn how to be a laser. Focus. Intent. Don't just push the energy out. Guide it." Brock, meanwhile, had become their quartermaster and spymaster. Years of traveling across every region, of making friends with nurses, breeders, and gym leaders, had given him a network that Volos's digital embargo couldn't touch. A coded message left with a sympathetic nurse Joy in Eterna City would result in a backpack of medical supplies and rations being left for them in a hollow log miles away. He was their lifeline, the quiet, steady bedrock upon which their desperate flight was built. Dawn was their heart. The weight of being a fugitive, the constant fear and uncertainty, was a heavy burden. But her spirit, though tested, refused to break. She found moments of levity, coaxing a smile out of Ash with a story about Piplup's latest clumsy antic, or engaging Cynthia in a debate about contest versus battle strategies, a small slice of normalcy in their chaotic existence. Through the covenant bond, Ash felt her anxiety, but he also felt her fierce, defiant hope, and it was often that hope that kept his own from faltering. Cynthia was their strategist. She consumed every scrap of news they could find, piecing together Volos's movements, predicting the Aegis division's patrol routes. "He's using the temporal distortions as a pretext," she explained, pointing to a map of Sinnoh she'd drawn in the dirt. "Every time an anomaly appears, he sends in the Aegis division, not just to contain it, but to solidify his control over the area. He's putting the entire region in a stranglehold, and he's using your name, Ash, as the justification for it all. The media is painting you as a rogue element, an unstable power source causing all this chaos." The chaos was getting worse. The small time loops and spatial warps were escalating. They were no longer just bizarre, localized phenomena. They were becoming dangerous. They passed through a stretch of woods where the trees grew in sideways spirals and the river flowed uphill. They saw a herd of terrified Standler phase in and out of reality, their forms flickering like a bad holovid. Giratina's brief intrusion had left a deeper wound than they'd thought, and the Arbiter's power, still untamed, was unintentionally aggravating it. The world was developing a fever, and they were at its epicenter. Their flight eventually led them to the marshlands south of Pastoria City, a place of perpetual mist and twisted, gnarled trees. The air here was thick and heavy, and the distortions were palpable. The mist would coalesce into solid, unmoving walls. Pockets of air would suddenly become as thick as water, making movement a struggle. The ground beneath their feet would lose its substance, their boots sinking into what should have been solid earth. It was here they found the village. It wasn't on any map. A small, forgotten collection of huts nestled deep in the swamp, inhabited by people who had lived off the land for generations. And it was a living nightmare. The entire village was trapped in a state of constant, low-grade distortion. Houses were twisted at impossible angles. The faces of the villagers were blurred, their features shifting and reforming. Nightmarish illusions flickered at the edge of their vision, glimpses of a world of jagged black rock and inverted gravity. The influence of the distortion world was no longer a brief tear, it was a persistent, seeping wound. "Giratina's territory is bleeding into ours," Annabelle murmured, her hand pressed to her temple as she fought off the psychic residue. "The wound from the spear pillar, it's not healing, it's festering." As they cautiously entered the village square, A scream of pure terror pierced the disorienting silence. It came from a larger, partially collapsed hut near the center of the village. Rushing towards the sound, they found a scene of absolute chaos. Inside the hut, a squad of 5 Aegis Division agents was trapped. Their high-tech equipment was sparking and malfunctioning, useless against the non-Euclidean physics of the space. The very air around them was warping, stretching their forms like pulled taffy one moment, compressing them the next. Illusory specters, shadowy things with too many limbs and silent, screaming faces, swarmed them. The agents were firing their stun rifles blindly, their shots dissolving into nothingness a few feet from the barrels. They were being overwhelmed, not by a physical threat, but by the sheer, maddening chaos of a hostile dimension. One agent was on the ground, curled in a ball, screaming at horrors only he could see. The moral calculus was immediate and brutal. These were Volos's soldiers. Their hunters. If they were to be captured, it would be these very people who would drag them away in chains. Leaving them was the logical, strategic choice. Annabelle was the first to voice it, her expression cold and pragmatic. We can't help them. Their presence here is a beacon. More will come. We use this opportunity to leave. It's the smart play. They're going to die, Dawn said, her voice shaking. She was looking at the agent on the ground, who was now weeping, his military discipline shattered. We can't just let them die. They wouldn't hesitate to capture us, Dawn, Brock argued, though his voice lacked conviction. He too was watching the scene, his healer's instincts at war with his pragmatism. The group was frozen, caught between self-preservation and conscience. Ash felt their conflict through the bond. Annabelle's cold logic, Dawn's passionate empathy, Cynthia's calculating silence, Brock's wavering resolve. They all looked to him. The arbiter. The one who had to make the call. He looked at the terrified agents, stripped of their technology and authority, reduced to scared, cornered men. He remembered Volos's words. Acceptable loss. He saw the family on the balcony. He saw the cold, uncaring machine Volos had built. And he knew he could not, would not, be like him. We save them, he said, his voice ringing with a finality that silenced all debate. We save everyone. That's the point. If we leave them, we're no better than he is. Cynthia nodded, a look of grim approval on her face. Then we need to get to the source. The illusions, the warping. It's all radiating from a central point. A tear. We have to close it. It's in there, Annabelle said, pointing towards the back of the hut, where the air was visibly shimmering, a heat haze of impossibly dark colors. A pocket of the distortion world has fully manifested. It's unstable. Entering it is suicide. Maybe not, Ash replied, his mind racing. He looked at Annabelle. Can you shield them? The agents? Protect their minds from the illusions, just for a few minutes? Annabelle's eyes narrowed. It will take all of my concentration. My espion and I can create a psychic sanctuary, a bubble of sanity. But we'll be completely vulnerable. Brock, Dawn, you're with Annabelle. Protect her, Ash commanded. Cynthia, you're with me. There was no time for argument. The plan was set. Annabelle closed her eyes, and her espion's gem began to glow with a powerful amethyst light. A wave of calming energy washed over the panicked agents, and the illusory specters shrieked and dissolved as they touched the field. The men stopped screaming, looking around in dazed confusion. Dawn sent out her mamoswine, its bulky form a solid wall of defense, while Brock's Krabat took to the air, its eyes scanning for any physical threats. Ash and Cynthia didn't wait. They plunged into the shimmering darkness at the back of the hut. The world dissolved. There was no up or down, no ground or sky. They were floating in a void of swirling, nauseating colors and jagged black crystals that drifted like islands in a sea of nothing. Gravity was a suggestion, not a law. Time flowed like mud. In the distance, platforms of rock floated at impossible angles, connected by bridges of solidified shadow. Welcome to the distortion world, Cynthia said, her voice strained as she fought to orient herself. Her Garchomp was out, its powerful claws finding purchase on a nearby floating rock, allowing her to anchor herself. This is a small, localized pocket, but the rules are the same, or rather, the lack of them. Ash felt the place pressing in on him, a profound sense of wrongness that scraped at his soul. He sent out his Infernape, whose fiery body was a beacon of warmth and stability in the cold, chaotic realm. They leapt from floating island to floating island, moving deeper into the pocket dimension. The source of the instability was a pulsing, bleeding wound in the fabric of this space, a vortex of angry red and black energy. It was the original tear from the spear pillar, refracted and mirrored into this smaller pocket. As they drew closer, they saw a figure standing on a ledge near the vortex, silhouetted against the chaotic light. The figure was lean, clad in dark, form-fitting gear, with a shock of distinctive crimson hair. A high-tech visor covered their eyes. Ash's blood ran cold. "No way," he breathed. "It can't be." The figure turned, and a cruel, familiar smirk graced her lips. She raised her arm, and a cannon mounted on her wrist powered up with a low hum. It was Pokemon Hunter Jay. Well, Jay's voice was a low, dangerous purr, laced with a new, ragged edge. "Look what the dimensional rift dragged in. Ash Ketchum. Still collecting strays and playing the hero, I see." Cynthia's hand flew to her Pokeballs. "Jay, you were. The news said your airship went down in Lake Valor." "It did," Jay said, her smirk widening into a predator's grin. She tapped a scarred panel on her chest plate. "Right into the vortex Cyrus created. Lucky me. Instead of drowning, I got a long-term lesson in transdimensional physics." She looked different. Her gear was battered and scorched. There was a haunted, desperate look in her eyes that hadn't been there before, the look of someone who has survived something unimaginable. She was leaner, harder, a predator honed by a world where the laws of nature were a joke. "How have you survived in here?" Ash asked, stunned. "By being smarter and meaner than everything else in this God's forsaken dimension," she snapped. Her salamence materialized behind her, its eyes glowing with a feral, untamed light. It looked as hardened and half-mad as its master. "This place, it preys on weakness. On order. My tech is barely functional. My ship is a wreck. But I learned the pathways. I learned how to navigate the chaos. And I learned that these little bleeds into your world are the only places with stable enough energy for me to get a signal out. I've been trying to find a way back for months." Her eyes fixed on Ash, specifically on the golden aura that was now faintly shimmering around him as he instinctively braced himself. Her cold, analytical gaze sharpened. "That power," she whispered, a flicker of something like hope in her eyes. "I've felt echoes of it. It's the opposite of this place. It's a creative, ordering principle. It's a key." Her smirk returned, but this time it was different. Less cruel, more calculating. "You want to close this rift. I want to get out of this hell. It seems we have a mutual interest." Cynthia took a protective step in front of Ash. "We will never work with you, Jay. You're a criminal. A monster." "Oh, spare me the hero speech, champion," Jay sneered. "Your moral high ground doesn't exist in here. Out there, I'm a criminal. In here, I'm the expert. You can't close that rift. It's not a simple tear. It's anchored to this pocket. You try to force it shut from your side, and the backlash will vaporize that whole village. But from in here," she patted her arm cannon. "My cannon is nearly out of power, but I can recalibrate its energy core to emit a counter frequency. I can destabilize the anchor point from this side. It will cause a controlled collapse, sealing the pocket without a catastrophic energy release." It was a classic devil's bargain. Her expertise in exchange for her freedom. "Why should we trust you?" Ash challenged, his hand on Infernape's shoulder. "Because I want out more than you want me to stay in," Jay said, her voice raw with a desperation she couldn't hide. "Another month in this place and I'll be as mad as the screaming shadows. I help you, you get me out. You take me with you. That's the deal." The tension was thick enough to taste. Ash looked at Cynthia. Her expression was a mask of fury and disgust. Working with Jay was unthinkable. This woman had stolen Pokemon, endangered lives, and tried to kill him on multiple occasions. But her logic was sound. They were out of their depth. They didn't know the rules of this place. If she was right about the backlash. He felt the covenant. He felt Cynthia's rigid, absolute refusal. He felt Dawn's distant fear and revulsion at the mere thought of Jay. He felt Annabelle's pragmatic mind weighing the odds, calculating the potential for betrayal versus the certainty of failure. And he felt his own choice solidifying. Jay was a monster. But the people in the village were innocent. The Aegis agents, for all their faults, were still people. He had made the choice to save everyone. That hadn't changed. If this was the price, he would pay it. Okay, Ash said, cutting through Cynthia's impending protest. We have a deal. Cynthia stared at him, aghast. Ash, you can't be serious. I am, he stated, his gaze locked on Jay. But let's be clear. You cross us, you even think about hurting anyone, and I won't need a dimension to trap you in. You'll answer to me, directly. The faint golden light around him flared for a moment, and the air crackled. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The untamed arbiter power, channeled through his raw will, made the chaotic space around them seem to still for a second. Jay's eyes widened slightly. She had felt it. A flicker of genuine fear, or perhaps respect, crossed her face. Understood, she said, her voice tight. Now, get ready. I can only hold the frequency for a few seconds. Champion, you're Garchomp. I need a dragon pulse, aimed at the exact center of the vortex, the moment I give the signal. The energy signature should catalyze the collapse. Catch him, you and your fire breather, be ready to run. She turned and began making rapid adjustments to her arm cannon, the clicks and whirs of the mechanism echoing in the bizarre silence. Cynthia looked at Ash, her expression a storm of conflict, but she didn't argue. He had made the decision. As the leader of this covenant, his word was, for better or worse, law. She nodded grimly and turned to Garchomp, giving it quiet instructions. Ash braced himself, the heat from Infernape a comforting presence at his back. He had just made a pact with one of his most hated enemies. He had invited a viper into their midst. He could feel the turmoil it was causing within the bond, a schism of doubt and anger. He had saved the lives of his hunters, but he might have just doomed his entire group in the process. He could only hope the price was worth it. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Rival and the Mountain's Fury. The collapse of the pocket dimension was not an explosion, it was an implosion. Jay's arm cannon whined, emitting a dissonant, high-frequency pulse that struck the vortex. For a split second, the swirling tear of red and black turned a brilliant, blinding white. Now, champion, Jay yelled. Cynthia didn't hesitate. Garchomp, Dragon Pulse. The blast of draconic energy, a shimmering turquoise beam, lanced through the chaotic space and struck the heart of the widened vortex. The result was instantaneous. The world folded in on itself. The floating islands of rock and shadow were pulled toward the center with terrifying speed. The very fabric of the pocket dimension was being sucked into a single, non-existent point. Move! Ash roared, grabbing Cynthia's arm and pulling her along. He and Infernape led the way, leaping across the disintegrating platforms, the void chasing at their heels. Jay and her salamence were right beside them, her movements economical and precise, driven by the desperate need for escape. It was a frantic, terrifying race against oblivion. They reached the shimmering doorway back to their own world just as the last island of rock they stood on crumbled into nothingness. They burst back into the twisted hut, tumbling onto the floor in a heap as the portal behind them sealed shut with a sound like tearing silk. The world was blessedly solid. The air was stable. The nauseating, off-kilter feeling was gone. Outside, the mists were receding, and the normal sounds of the marsh were returning. Annabelle was leaning against a wall, looking drained, her Espeon resting at her feet. Dawn and Brock were standing guard, their Pokémon looking exhausted but resolute. The Aegis agents were stirring, looking around in dazed confusion, their memories of the last hour a fragmented nightmare. Then they saw Jay instantly, the fragile piece shattered. Pokémon Hunter Jay. One of the agents yelled, his training kicking back in. He fumbled for the stun rifle that was now, miraculously, powering back on. Stand down. Cynthia's voice cut through the tension like a physical blow. She stood before Jay, a formidable barrier. She is with us. The statement hung in the air, a bombshell of confusion. Dawn stared, her mouth agape. Brock's eyes were wide with disbelief. This was the woman who had petrified their Pokémon, who had very nearly killed Ash, and now she was under the champion's protection. Jay, for her part, simply smirked, a flicker of her old arrogance returning now that she was back on solid ground. Listen to the nice champion, she purred. I'm a material witness now. Before the situation could devolve further, the lead agent's comm crackled to life. A clipped, authoritative voice cut through the static. Alpha Squad, report. What is your status? We have your location. The agent glanced from Jay to Cynthia, then back to his dazed comrades. He was out of his depth. Sir, the target is here. But, so is champion Cynthia. The situation is complicated. There was a pause. Then, a new voice came over the comm, one that made Ash's blood run cold. It was smooth, controlled, and utterly ruthless. Paul. Complicated is unacceptable, Paul's voice stated, devoid of any emotion. The chairman's directive is clear. Secure the asset. All other factors are secondary. I am taking command of this operation. On my way. The comm went dead. A chilling silence fell over the group. Paul. Ash's most ferocious, most ideological rival. What was he doing working with Volos? Jay let out a low whistle. The IPLA brought in a ringer. Smart. Sending a rival to do your dirty work. Very personal. We have to go, Cynthia said, her mind already moving past the shock and onto the strategy. Paul will not be as easy to dissuade as these agents. And he knows how you think, Ash. The Aegis agents were still hesitating, trapped between their orders and the sheer authority radiating from Cynthia. Ash used their indecision. He made a choice. He walked over to the lead agent, who flinched as he approached. Ash simply reached down and helped the man to his feet. Get your men out of here, Ash said, his voice quiet. Go. We won't stop you. The agent stared at him, his face a mask of confusion. They had been left to die. Ash had saved them. And now he was letting them go. It was a gesture that defied his entire worldview. Without a word, the agent nodded, gathered his squad, and retreated from the village, leaving them behind. An act of mercy, Jay observed, her tone laced with cynical amusement. Or a strategic blunder. We'll see which soon enough. They fled the marshlands, Jay now an unwelcome, menacing shadow in their midst. The tension within the group was a palpable thing. Don wouldn't even look at the hunter. Brock kept a wary distance, his hand never far from his pokeballs. Annabelle observed her with a cold, analytical neutrality, assessing her as a threat variable. Only Cynthia seemed to accept the necessity of it, though her disgust was clear. The Covenant bond was a mess of conflicting emotions. Ash felt Don's righteous anger, Annabelle's wary calculus, Cynthia's strained pragmatism. It was a discordant symphony in his head, and Jay was the sour note. They followed Jay's grudging guidance. If your rival is anything like you, she'd said, he'll anticipate you'll run to a major city, try to get lost in the crowds. He'll expect you to seek help from one of your gym leader friends. So we do the opposite. We go where no one would think to look for shelter. Her logic led them deep into the highlands, to the foot of Mount Coronet itself. The mountain is a maze of caves and ancient tunnels, Jay explained, her expertise in infiltration proving invaluable. The Aegis division will have the main routes locked down, but there are paths here that aren't on any map. We can use them to bypass Volos' patrols and get to the northern side of the region. Their goal was Snowpoint City. Cynthia believed they could find a temporary ally in Candace, the gym leader, and use the city's remote location to plan their next move. The ascent into the mountain was arduous. The air grew thin and cold, and the path was treacherous. But the real obstacle was not the mountain. It was waiting for them on a high, wind-swept plateau, a natural arena of rock and ice. Paul stood there, a solitary figure against the gray sky, his hands shoved in his pockets. His purple hair was ruffled by the wind. Behind him, his electivire stood like a colossus of muscle and yellow fur, its twin tails crackling with barely contained power. I knew you'd come this way, Ash, Paul said, his voice flat. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded weary. You always choose the hardest path. Ash stepped forward, his friends fanning out behind him. Paul. Why? Why are you doing this? Working for a man like Volos. Paul's gaze was hard as flint. He offered me what I've always wanted. The resources to finally surpass you. The chance to prove that my way, pure strength, perfect strategy, power without sentiment, is superior. He gestured dismissively at Ash. Look at you. A fugitive, dragging a collection of strays and criminals behind you. And this power you have? It's a crutch. An unpredictable variable. It's not real strength. Real strength is earned. Forged, controlled. He pointed a finger at Ash, his eyes burning with a cold fire. I'm going to strip you of that crutch, Ash. I'm going to defeat you, hand you over to the chairman, and prove, once and for all, that my philosophy is the one that creates true champions. The challenge was laid bare. This was not just a battle for Ash's freedom. It was a battle for their very souls, a clash of ideologies that had defined their entire rivalry. One-on-one, Ash, Paul declared. Me versus you. Electivire versus whoever you think can stand against him. No tricks. No help from your fan club. He shot a contemptuous glance at Cynthia and Jay. Just power against power. Ash looked at his team. This was personal. Paul was right. This had to be between them. He felt the concern from his friends through the bond, but he also felt their trust. He nodded. You're on, Paul. Pikachu tensed on his shoulder, ready. But Ash gently shook his head. This wasn't Pikachu's fight. He needed something else. Power against power. He unclipped a Pokeball from his belt. Infernape, I choose you. The fire ape appeared in a flash of red light, letting out a roar that echoed across the plateau. The flames on his head burned with a fierce intensity. He and Electivire had a history, a rivalry as deep and personal as Ash and Paul's. They stared each other down, a silent promise of the violence to come. The battle that followed was nothing short of breathtaking. It was a masterclass in high-level Pokemon combat. Paul was a strategic genius, his commands precise and ruthless. Electivire moved with a brutal efficiency, its thunder punches and giga impacts shaking the very ground they stood on. It was augmented by a piece of Aegis tech, a small device on its back that glowed with a faint blue light, allowing it to use its electrical attacks with even greater speed and power. But Ash was no longer the trainer Paul had once known. The Arbiter's power, the constant hum of the Covenant in his mind, had sharpened his senses. He saw the battle not as a series of moves and counter-moves, but as a flow of energy. He could feel Infernape's fighting spirit, the burn of his exhaustion, the surge of his adrenaline. His commands were no longer just shouted words, they were bursts of intent, of shared will. Infernape, use his momentum. Flare Blitz. Now, Infernape became a living comet, cloaked in blue-white fire, meeting Electivire's Giga Impact head-on. The explosion was colossal, a wave of force that sent pebbles skittering across the plateau. Both Pokemon were thrown back, scarred and breathing heavily. You're just reckless, Ash, Paul yelled over the wind. Burning through his stamina for a simple clash, Electivire, thunder. A massive bolt of lightning, thicker than a man's torso, crashed down from the sky. Into the ground. Infernape, dig, Ash commanded. Infernape burrowed into the rock with incredible speed, the lightning striking the spot where he'd been a second before, shattering the stone. Now, Flare Blitz. From below, the ground beneath Electivire erupted as Infernape burst out, a subterranean missile of pure fire, slamming into the electric giant's underside and sending it flying. The battle raged, a brutal ballet of fire and lightning. Both Pokemon were reaching their absolute limits. Infernape was scorched and bruised, his movements becoming slower. Electivire was panting, the Aegis device on its back flickering erratically, forcing it to burn energy at an unsustainable rate. It's over, Ash, Paul roared, his composure finally cracking into raw desperation. This is the power you can't overcome. Electivire, maximum output, wild charge. Electivire bellowed, its entire body becoming a conduit for pure, untamed electricity. The Aegis device glowed a furious red, overloading its systems. This was an all-or-nothing, suicidal attack. Electivire charged, leaving a trench in the stone behind it, a living thunderbolt aimed straight at Infernape's heart. Infernape was too exhausted to dodge. He braced himself, a final, defiant roar on his lips. Ash watched, his heart pounding. He could feel Infernape's will, his refusal to fall. But he could also feel the self-destructive torrent of energy pouring from Electivire. Paul, in his obsession, was about to destroy his own Pokemon. And in that moment, something shifted in Ash. His goal wasn't to win anymore. He closed his eyes. The world of rock and wind and battle faded away. He reached for his aura, for the golden light of the Arbiter. But he didn't push it into Infernape to give him more power. He didn't shape it into a weapon to strike Electivire down. He did something else. A brilliant, golden light flared around Ash. It surged forward, not as an attack, but as a shield. It didn't meet Electivire's charge. It flowed around it, enveloped it. The rampaging electricity, the killing intent, the self-destructive overload. It all washed against the golden light and was soothed, calmed. The golden aura wasn't a barrier of force. It was a barrier of empathy. Ash projected his own will, his own deep love and respect for Pokemon, into the shield. He wasn't trying to stop Electivire. He was trying to save it. Electivire, its mind clouded by rage and the Aegis device's influence, crashed into the golden shield and stopped. The violent electricity arcing from its body sputtered and died. It stood there, trembling, its eyes clearing. It looked at its own fists, then at the exhausted Infernape, then at Ash, who stood with his arm outstretched, the golden light fading around him. The Aegis device on Electivire's back sparked, smoked, and went dead. The great Pokemon swayed on its feet and then collapsed, not from damage, but from sheer, soul-deep exhaustion. Silence. Paul stared, his mouth open, his face a canvas of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. He hadn't been beaten by a stronger attack. He hadn't been outmaneuvered. His ultimate expression of power had been defeated by an act of pure, unadulterated empathy. Ash hadn't just defeated his Pokemon, he had protected it, from Paul himself. Everything Paul had built his identity on, the rejection of sentiment, the pursuit of pure power, crumbled to dust in that one, selfless moment. He sank to his knees, his gaze distant. I pushed him too far, he whispered, staring at his fallen partner. He had seen his philosophy taken to its absolute extreme, and the result wasn't victory, it was ruin. Ash walked over, his own exhaustion making his steps heavy. He stood before his rival, not in triumph, but in sorrow. Power isn't the goal, Paul. It's a tool. The real strength, it's the bond you have. It's knowing when not to push. Paul looked up at Ash, and for the first time, the contempt and rivalry were gone from his eyes. They were replaced by a raw, painful understanding. He gave you everything, and you threw it back at him, he said, his voice thick with self-loathing. I pushed him to destroy himself, and you saved him. He recalled his Electivire with a trembling hand. He stood up, a different man than the one who had stood there minutes before. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a heavy, humbling clarity. Volos, his goal isn't to calm Giratina, Paul said, his voice hollow. He finally understood the deception he'd been a part of. He's building something at the spear pillar. A machine. An order engine, he calls it. He needs a massive power source. He's not trying to prevent chaos. He's trying to harness it. To capture it. He looked Ash in the eye. He plans to capture Giratina itself. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Without another word, Paul turned and walked away, disappearing into the mountain mist. He didn't offer to join them. His shame and his failure were his own to carry. But he had given them a crucial, terrifying piece of the puzzle. And in his defeat, he had become something more than a rival. He had become a warning. As Paul's footsteps faded, a low, guttural growl echoed from the path ahead. The way to the northern pass was blocked. A massive, quadrupedal Pokemon, its body like a shell of molten steel and its eyes burning with rage, stood in their way. A Heatran. Driven mad by the mountain's instability and the echoes of the battle, it saw them as invaders in its territory. Its body began to glow, the temperature on the plateau rising instantly. They had won the battle of ideologies. Now, they had to survive the mountain's fury. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.